Welcome to She Moves Bravely, a podcast dedicated to empowering women through stories of resilience, courage, and success. I'm your host, Shantae Dent. Today, I have the honor of introducing you to a woman who moves bravely, and her name is Leah Forney. Leah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Shantae.
Leah, I'm honored to have you join us today, sharing your story, sharing hope, and then of course sharing with the ladies what you do and how you can serve them on their healing journey.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for you to start by sharing what have you overcome? How did you overcome it?
Yeah. So one, thanks for having me. Sexual assault awareness month and sexual assault awareness and prevention month is near and dear to my heart because I'm a sexual assault, like I call myself a thriver. I always say there's a difference between surviving and thriving through something. And so I wasn't always a thriver though. I was sexually assaulted January 27, 2013, right in my apartment in North Carolina. I was actually very new to the state, probably been there about a little over a year. And my perpetrator worked at the car rental place. And so at the time, I had this hoopty that broke down and I was trying to rent a car. And when I couldn't rent the car, because I didn't meet all the criteria, he offered to drive me home. The drive home, he talked about being like a deacon in the church and all these things. And I was heavy in the church at the time. So I was like excited to have connected with someone from the same spiritual background. And he asked me out on a date. I met him for dinner one time. And, I always believe in intuition, right? So sometimes, ladies, we need to trust our gut. And so I had that one date with him. And after the date, I kind of had this gut feeling like this is just not someone I want to be associated with. So I decided to disconnect myself from him and let him know, like, hey, thank you for the date, but I just don't feel like we should, continue. I was hopeful that he would just understand and kind of go his separate ways. But little did I know he started stalking me. And so I lived in it's not really a small area in North Carolina. It's right outside of Raleigh. But you can get everywhere in like 10, 15 minutes. And so it seemed like every time I would show up in certain places, he was there. Right. I could even remember like I got into like a car accident where my car slid off the side of the road and then literally coming up on the side street was this man. So it was it almost felt like he had like a tracker on me, like he knew where I was all the time. And so on January 27, 2013, I was actually home in my apartment. I was waiting on one of my good girlfriends to come pick me up because I didn't have a car and we were going to go to church. And I got a phone call that a loved one had passed. And so I was very distraught and, hurt that getting this information. And so as soon as I hung up with the person that called me about this loved one, he actually ended up calling me. And so when he called me, of course, he hears the vulnerability, he hears that I'm distraught. He asks me what's wrong. I'm telling him, I just found out someone I love had passed away. And so he offers to come and console me. And against my better judgment, I agree. Well, little did I know he was already sitting outside my apartment. And so he came in my apartment, and what was supposed to be about, consoling me because I just got this call that the loved one had passed, actually turned into him berating me about how I rejected him. And so in the moments that he's berating me, I had this gut feeling that something was getting ready to happen. I can't sit here and say that I was like, "Ooh, I'm about to get raped." But I had this gut feeling that was like, Leah, you are in danger, girl. And you need to figure out how you're going to get yourself out of this. And so I asked him 2 times, could he leave? And he wouldn't move. And so then the third time I asked him, could he leave? And he got up from off the couch. And so I was like, okay, I think he's going to leave, right? Well, little did I know that in that moment, he decided he was going to grab me and rape me right in my living room. And so after he raped me, he proceeded to leave like nothing ever happened. I immediately went and grabbed my phone to try to call my friend who was en route. And she got to my apartment. And of course, like most people, they encourage you to, to report. And so I remember saying to her, I said, I can't report. I said, I'm a Black woman in America and he was in my house. Like, that was my fear. My instant thing was, who's gonna believe me? Here I am, a Black woman that let this man in her house. Like, that's all I could think. So I always tell people, like, I got raped on a Sunday. It took me to Tuesday to report it. And so when I got to church, I told my spiritual parents what happened to me. And immediately they grabbed me and held me and were like, it is not your fault. Again, encouraging me to make the report. And so it took me till Tuesday to make the report. And when I made the report, I wish I could say that I felt like the justice system was going to do something. In fact, I felt worse because the police officer that came to my apartment was a Black male officer who asked me 5 to 7 times, was I absolutely sure I was raped? Because I had mentioned that I went on one date with this guy. And so then I had the female detective who was assigned to my case. Again, you would think a woman coming to talk to another woman, there would be this level of empathy or compassion. She was very cold and callous, no empathy at all. And so the initial steps was to like go to the emergency room, get the rape kit done, which that procedure by itself is a lot because your body's now evidence. And so you gotta get all these swabs and all these things happening and all the questions. And it was just a lot. And so after that, the first step was to try to get a restraining order against this person. And so we had 2 court dates that he didn't show up on. And then the third one, he showed up after I picked him out on the lineup and everything. And the judge, who was a white male judge, proceeded to tell me that he did not believe I was raped, that he believed that I was a woman scorned. And then he got up off the bench and went in his chambers, never dismissed us, no nothing. And I'm sitting there watching the man that I know raped me with this smirk on his face as if he just won. And so that same judge came back and he was like, oh, you still here? Case dismissed. And so in that moment, my life is now in shambles because I know for a fact I had been raped. And now I done went through this whole process of doing what I believe was right by reporting it, and the justice system is failing me. And so I had this emotional breakdown. My grandmother, she was with me in the courtroom. And I remember another white male sheriff come to me and literally said, if you don't get it together and stop causing this disruption, I'm going to lock you up. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking to myself, the person you should be locking up is walking out of the courtroom. Like, are you kidding me? And so in that moment, I had to make a decision, like, how are you going to move forward? Because the justice system failed you. Nobody believes you. How are you going to move forward? And so at that time, I was already connected with the local rape crisis center. And so I just decided to finally sign up for therapy, and I started going to therapy and started working through some of the challenges that I was facing. Sexual trauma brings out a lot of different challenges. And so for me, I was dealing with PTSD, being very easily startled. I still have, residue of PTSD. Like, people that know me know that, like, if I don't see you, you got to announce yourself, because otherwise you're going to scare the crap out of me. I had anxiety and panic attacks. I struggled with feeling attractive for a very long time. Like, I would go to therapy with sweatpants and a hoodie on. And like, my therapist, who was a white woman, by the way, who absolutely amazing, she was just like so encouraging, like, Leah, do something to make yourself feel like you again. But it was hard because in my mind, I was just like, I don't want to be attractive, because if I'm attractive, then I'm going to attract another person that's going to violate me. And so I struggled with just feeling attractive again for a long time. And then I had, struggles with hypersexuality, which is something that people don't think about or associate with sexual trauma. But there was a time after I was raped where I craved sex. And I thought it was weird. It was just like, why am I craving sex? And so it was my therapist that helped me understand what hypersexuality was and really helped me to understand that it was less about the sex and more about me wanting to regain power and control over my body because it had been violated. And so between therapy and really my relationship with God, I started to piece back my life and kind of started moving forward. I wish I could say that moment was probably the last time I dealt with law enforcement, but it wasn't. Unfortunately, 9 years after my rape, June 2022, that same law enforcement agency calls me to tell me that they tested my rape kit. And so they had a DNA match and they wanted to know what did I want to do. And my immediate response was, well, you always had a DNA match. Mm-hmm. Like that was a given. I told you I was raped. I didn't lie about it. And so for just clarifying educational purposes, anytime there's a DNA match, oftentimes it means that the offender or the perpetrator has offended before, whether it's the same type of crime or another type of crime. So that was what they were calling me to say. And so I'm like, that's a given. But what I learned in getting that phone call was that the reason why it took 9 years for them to test my kit was that the laws back in 2013 in the state of North Carolina was that if you knew your perpetrator or if the perpetrator stated that it was consensual, they didn't test. And so I immediately got offended by that because I'm like, well, that goes against what we know statistically, right? Which is that 53% of all rapes that occur, the victim knows who did it. Mm-hmm. So if we know that statistically, how the hell do you have a law that says, well, because you knew him or because you went on this date with him, we're not going to test the kit. And so they started to rechange those laws. And I learned back then that here in the United States of America, we have a horrible injustice because we have a backlog of untested rape kits. There is literally over 225,000 untested rape kits throughout the United States of America. And so that phone call sparked the action that people see me take today. I was always advocating against sexual violence, but I went full time in it after getting that phone call because for me it was like, if it took 9 years for me, I can only imagine how many other people are still waiting. So that's the story.
That is the powerful story. Heartbreaking and also happy, full of joy to hear how you have come out on the other side.
Yeah.
It's always heartbreaking, and I love though that you started with, today I call myself a thriver. I wasn't always, calling myself that thriver, but there's so much of what you shared that I know women can resonate with. And the first response always is, I hate that happened to you.
Yeah.
I've been sexually violated as a child, experienced acquaintance rape as well. And it's one thing of like, no one wishes that on anyone. And especially if you've been through it, you really cringe when you hear like another person. And, not, you hear me, I'm like, not even just another woman, another person endured that type of trauma and pain. And it's heartbreaking, which is clearly why you, myself, and many others do the work that we do to help individuals cross over to the other side. Mm-hmm. I want to extract a few points that you made. So there were statements that you made that I could resonate with due to my story. And so I know that many others can resonate as well. The truth is, it's not a straightforward path when it comes to sexual assault. And yes, different states have different laws. And I learned that years later. You said something, and it's a heartbreaking statement that I wish I didn't have to even repeat or acknowledge. But I am going to hone in on it for a second because I heard the same words. And I imagine there's another woman who's heard the words and perhaps she threw in the towel and just gave up and said it's not worth it. But if anything, let us be the ones to tell you to keep on fighting for your freedom, fighting for your emotional freedom initially. Yeah. Okay, so these statements that we hear, where initially someone might not think the victim is telling the truth. And we know that there's a small percentage, a very small percentage of people who will say, I was raped and they weren't. I always say two things. Could y'all just stop it? Because for the ones who were raped, you're really messing it up for them. And if anyone is saying they were raped and they weren't, my heart goes out for them because clearly there's something going on in their lives that needs attention. I'm not mad at you. I have compassion and empathy for you because there is something else going on that would even cause you to, falsely accuse someone. And so I do want to bring attention to that area. But when it comes to the statistics, I remember years later calling the police department that took care of my case. Eventually, I pressed charges and the DA did not move forward. And these are details that I won't go into today. It's not about me today. It's about you, Leah. But one of the words that I heard, because I had to call back, I need to circle around. Growing up, my favorite question was why? And I need to know why. Yeah. And I remember calling this detective and I said, okay, here's my case number. Here are the details. Can you help me understand why this DA didn't move forward? I know it happened. He knew it happened on a recorded phone call, admitted to it. But what helped me understand what was the missing link? And she pointed out a couple of things. She said, unfortunately, for someone like you, a young Black girl who's accusing someone of raping, someone that you know, that you've had a history with, it's not taken as seriously. And for my particular situation, this individual, he put it out there as if, I'm so sorry. And I would not ever doubt that he wasn't sorry. He did apologize to me. He didn't serve any time for what he did. Yeah. But I remember hearing the detective tell me what she told me, and she said, it's the hardest part of my job. Really? And of course, I thanked her for her transparency. I thanked her for being honest with me, but my goodness, what I think people don't understand is after the act is done, there's an aftermath that lingers and lingers and lingers. And on top of that, there are the layers of, you don't believe me? Yeah. Yep. And I wanted to highlight that because again, I wish that weren't the reality. And we know, let's not sugarcoat it. There's a white woman who's not believed. There's a Hispanic woman who's not believed. So we don't want to make it all about, they just don't believe the Black women. I dare not even, go that far out. We're really just in this moment sharing our reality. And I know, again, this is the truth for many women, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, any other ethnicity. We know the reality of it and the pain of it. And I just want to acknowledge that because we're not against, our justice system or the police officers or the detectives. I would never make those broad statements. I also want to acknowledge those who have had those unfortunate experiences. It happens. Yeah. And for that woman who it has happened to, it's not, please, please, please understand, if you can, position yourself to separate the two. That's their opinion. That's their take. But you know what happened to you. And I always tell people, I wish I could keep on keeping on and acting as if it never happened, but you can't erase the aftermath of sexual trauma. You have to look at it, address it, deal with it, and heal from it. It doesn't disappear. And so it is unfortunate. So again, when I heard you say that, I thought, I imagine there's another woman out there who's heard the same story and she was probably discouraged and chose to stay silent. because someone didn't believe her because of her age, any other demographic. Oh, you lived in this particular area, you look like that, or this is what you were wearing, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And you also talked about, Leah, how you would show up trying to be unattractive. That's another similarity. I went so long, I was plain Jane.
Yep.
Like no jewelry, no makeup. I'm as frumpy could be because I don't want you to look at me.
Yep.
I don't need to think about it. And isn't it interesting how, in some ways that's distorted because what we know about sexual assault, it is about power and control.
Mm-hmm.
This person, that violator, that perpetrator wanting to extend power and control over you. And so it doesn't matter how young or old you are, what you're wearing or not wearing. That individual will choose to do the evil.
Yeah.
And that is another reality that many victims, survivors have to address. I want to hide now. I do not want to be visible. I don't want to draw any attention to myself because I don't want to risk being violated again. It's a form of bondage that hurts my heart. But it's familiar, isn't it? It's familiar.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And the other thing that most people don't think about too is how sexual violence kind of leaves you in a space where you're always on edge, or you pick up on predatory behaviors easily
You
and
do.
quickly. I was out to dinner with my significant other just last weekend, and we were at a bar, and like this dude that was at the bar, his energy just read predatory behavior, and my significant other was like, "You all right?" I was like, "No," because this person's energy is making me believe, like, and he knows what has happened to me in the past, and he's very supportive of the work that I do. But like, you easily pick up on it, because it's like it's that thing that just stays with you for the rest of your life. And I love that you mentioned that you can heal from it. But you have to heal. Like, there is no going around it. There is no like escaping it. I was telling a good friend of mine that was like, Leah, I just love the work that you do. And I tell people, like, I just believe as a woman of God that if we go through things and we survive it, then God has literally assigned us to help others in that same space. And I always tell people, if I could pick and choose what my life's mission would be and my life's work, I promise you it would not be talking about sexual trauma. I promise you. I would probably choose something completely different, something that's really light. But I believe that God calls us to solve bigger societal problems. And I believe that that's the mandate that he puts on all his children, that our job is to go after the things that break our Father's heart. And I just believe sexual trauma is one of those things that breaks his heart. And so that's my assignment, and I walk fully in it.
And I'm glad you're walking fully in it. And you're absolutely right. Like if we could change the story, no, I don't think I want to sign up for that one. But that leads me to the power of what we do and why we do it, our why. You know this, Leah, when you cross over, that kind of freedom, like I have my joy back. I have my peace again. I know who I am again. You mean now I can actually look in the mirror and see a beautiful, radiant woman? Oh my goodness. I never thought this day would come. And once you receive that again, there definitely, and I'll speak for myself, and clearly this is what you're saying as well. There's a desire that stirs up inside of you, and you can't ignore it, because what we remember is what it was like when we were engulfed in that pain. It was horrible. I would never sugarcoat it. That's crazy. No, those were tough years. But when we intentionally decided that we will heal and recover, because we don't want this trauma to be the trailblazer for the rest of our lives. And then we do the work and we receive the help that God sends our way. When you cross over to the other side, something hits you. because you remember what it was like back then, and you want to serve others so they don't have to stay in that place of pain, so they don't have to remain paralyzed in that pain. And it's interesting when you talked about, you kind of have a new radar. Ooh, I know that there were times where I'd be with my sister, and if we would, I remember one time in particular, we were out, and someone that we knew, he was someone from childhood, from somebody from church. I didn't recognize him, and he got a little too close in proximity. And she saw the look on my face. My sister intercepted so quick and was like, "It's good. We know him. That's so and so. You remember so and so from?" And then I thought, "Oh, okay. You don't tell me something, because I'm wondering."
Yeah, you pick up on it real quick.
You just, your perspective changes a little bit. But what I love is we can find a healthy balance. And this is, again, a part of the work that you do, that many are doing, to say we will never minimize what sexual violation did to you, to your life. It changed the trajectory of your life. It possibly impacted every single area of your life.
Yeah.
And we want to help bring a healthy balance. So even with a different perspective, you can continue to live a functional life, functional relationships, healthy relationships, healthy relationships with your colleagues, with your spouse, significant other, children, anyone in your life. The goal is that as you continue living, you can live life free. And we're not telling you all that it happens overnight. What we're telling you is that it's possible. We're rooting for you, and we're here for you.
Yeah.
Leah, could you share about what you're doing today, how you are helping survivors along their journey?
Yeah. So I've been advocating in activism. Actually, April of this year, 2024, will make 10 years that I've been doing this. I started out speaking out about sexual assault use during Take Back the Night, which is an event that happens during Sexual Assault Awareness Month in most states. And so in North Carolina, a year after I was raped, the rape crisis center that I was still getting my counseling from, they were hosting Take Back the Night. And my counselor thought, I think you're ready. I think you're ready to publicly talk about it. And so with her blessing and my spiritual parents' blessing, I decided that was going to be the first time I publicly talked about my sexual trauma. And I think what was so beautiful about that moment was that once I got done speaking, my spiritual mom was standing right behind me with her arms open just to tell me how proud she was. And I knew that was the moment, like, things were shifting for me, and I was getting ready to like embark on this work that I do now. And so I did a lot of speaking up and speaking out for a while, and then the activism and the advocacy really started to come into play a couple of years later, where I just started connecting with so many survivors. Like, I would go speak at different conferences, different summits, and there was always one in the room that would just come to me and be like, "You just told my story." Like, I remember when I spoke at the Attorney General's conference here in Maryland 2 years ago, and the survivor walked up to me, and she had never told anybody, and she had been harboring this pain. And literally her words were like, "As you were telling your story, I was cringing because I was like, that's what happened to me." So it's moments like that for me that really like solidifies why God called me to do the work that I do, because I want to be a voice for those who don't have the courage yet to share their story. And so a lot of what I do for survivors is really just encourage them, empower them. Some have reached out to me directly to want to know how I've gotten into advocacy work. And I always tell them, for the route that I took was that I started partnering with other organizations who are doing the work locally, because I believe that what's missing from there, is the survivor story. But more importantly, I also started having my own organization. So like you, Shantae, like I started building my own nonprofit with a dear friend of mine in 2018. We launched Save Me, which stands for Sexual Assault Advocacy for Victims Everywhere. And we launched it February 2018. She actually ended up passing away September 2018. And so when Carmen had passed, I kind of put it down for a minute because it was just like I didn't see how I could do this work without her because we started it together. And then maybe about 2, 3 years after her passing, my spiritual mom ended up passing. And she was also doing this work. And she was doing it from a different lens because her son was a rapist. And so she would go to court for her son and she would see how the justice system would tear down these victims. And so God had instructed her to like create her nonprofit specifically for victims and survivors, even though she was the mother of a perpetrator. And so when she passed away, I felt like it was so weird because she passed away a few days before my birthday. And it was the weirdest feeling. Like I felt such peace when she passed, but I felt like there was a passing of a baton. Like it was this feeling in my spirit that like she was saying, all right, it's time for you to continue to work. Like I've gotten us here. It's your turn now. And so that's when I was like, all right, God, I'm gonna go full steams ahead in this work. And I'm blessed to have said that I have trained law enforcement. I have spoken to attorney generals. Sometimes I gotta be a bad guy with law enforcement, but I've been able to, speak to legislators about why it's important that we change some of these laws, really like on the ground floor doing the work. I tell people all the time, I'm one of those survivors that don't just talk about it, I be about it. People reach out to me. I get interviewed all the time, major press all the time, because it's not too many women of color that are survivors that are doing this work. And so a lot of the work that I do, even when I'm training, I speak specifically for marginalized communities because sexual assault impacts us way differently than it impacts a Caucasian woman. And so I like to educate from that perspective and that lens of like just really understanding how it impacts marginalized communities as a whole. But I'm blessed to do the work that I do. I really am.
Thank you for doing the work that you're doing. You are moving bravely. And I felt that in my heart, even with your friend Carmen passing away, your spiritual mom passing away. Those are that's tragic. People who were pillars in your life, and it's beautiful that you were able to navigate through those experiences and continue moving forward.
Yeah.
I commend you, Leah. I do. How can our listeners get in touch with you, work with you, have you speak on their platforms, or survivors just connect with you and receive assistance from you as they proceed throughout their healing journey?
Yeah, so I tell people I'm on all the social media platforms, Leah M. Forney. You can find me there. Definitely check out my website, www.leahmforney.com. That's where you'll learn all about my sexual assault work and all that I do. And then definitely you can always email me at info@leahmforney.com. Save Me is about to be up and running. I am in the process of filing the 501c3. So that will be launching this year, and I'm excited. Well, relaunching this year, so I'm excited about that because my goal with Save Me is to definitely be survivor centered, survivor focused, and really start offering a lot of support groups. I have 2 amazing therapists that are on my board, and so I'm just looking forward to really helping to create a community through Save Me for survivors mainly to get the healing that they need and the support that they need, and so that they know that they're not alone on this journey to recovery.
Life-changing work that you're doing, Leah. Keep it up. I'm rooting for you. I am proud of you. And thank you for being an incredible guest, making a mark in the lives of many women, a mark that will never be erased.
Thank you.